The Green Bay Packers want to take a tight end in this draft class. They need to take a tight end in this draft class, maybe two, maybe even three. So where should they find these guys? What is the profile of the kind of player that has success in the NFL? We ask someone who has studied this, and he has some thoughts. Plus, why the biggest jump from the Packers from last year to this year is going to come from guys already on the roster.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Kevin Cole on the show today from Unexpected Points, formerly of Pro Football Focus. That's where I first connected with his work. He is a really smart guy, and I think he does a really good job of taking dense ideas and even dense methodologies and says, this is the real, like this is the stuff that you actually need to know. You don't need to like learn how he does regression analysis or anything like that. No, here's what the data tells us. And I think the conversation about trying to project tight ends and what it tells us and what it importantly, I think, doesn't tell us is really a lot of fun. I want to start today, though, with this conversation that I've been wanting to have for a long time now. And I thought as we get closer to the draft, it was really important. And as we, kvetch about the draft capital and all of the leverage and the nonsense and the draft haul that the Packers got from the New York Jets, I need to remind you, because I have not done it often enough over the course of the last few months. It was something I did often when the team was really good and it felt like they were one or two playmakers away. Most rookies are bad. Most rookies are bad. Now the Packers, they move up in the first round. That's good. They get the extra second round pick. That's good. They are now in a better position today than they were 3 days ago to get some good players, because more bites at the apple, more top 50 picks in particular, give them more opportunities, more chances to hit on a guy like Christian Watson or a guy like Davante Adams, who at least showed flashes as a rookie, a guy like Nick Collins, who can start from day one, Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson, who took some time, but you can find guys. Then there are other times. I think Jordy Nelson is actually a great example. It took him really 4 years before he was a bona fide part of the offense. The positions where the Packers need help. Receiver. Well, they drafted 2 last year. Interior defensive line. Well, they used a first round pick on one last year. There are questions about the future of the offensive line. Well, there's a top 100 pick who could not even get on the field last year. The run defense is still a problem. Well, they used the 22nd overall pick on a hyper-athletic linebacker. Oh, what's the future of David Bakhtiari? Well, Zach Tom might be the future of David Bakhtiari, frankly. And so those guys, certainly in the case of Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Quay Walker, and Zach Tom, they got real reps last year. Meaningful reps. And in various amounts showed genuine promise. Devonte Wyatt, in very small samples, showed genuine promise. Christian Watson is going to be expected to come in this year and be their wide receiver 1. We saw over the second half of the season, you can build a good offense around Christian Watson as your wide receiver 1 when Aaron Rodgers is your quarterback. Now, he didn't play great. I've said that over and over. In fact, he played below average, not just by his standards, by NFL standards. But he was able to be the passing engine. Romeo Doubs, for the first 6 weeks or so of the season, was essentially your wide receiver one. Allen Lazard, he had some big games too, but when they needed it, Romeo Doubs was their guy. Those two players are going to be, at the very least, two of the top 3 or 4 guys by targets this year. They need to be better this year than they were last year, and they can be, because the biggest leap we see guys make is from year 1 to year 2. If Christian Watson takes an incremental step forward, we're talking about one of the 15 best receivers in football. If Romeo Doubs takes an incremental step forward, we're talking about a quality complementary receiver. That's really important for this team. Devontae Wyatt is going to be your starter in all likelihood. He needs to be your starter because you need to take those Dean Lowry snaps. You have now flushed them down the toilet. You could make the case that they were being flushed down the toilet last year and he was on the field. Now, can you play like a first round pick? At least in fits and starts, in spurts. Show the 12 snap stuff when you're getting 90 plus PFF grades. Now show that over 30 snaps, over 40 snaps. If he can do that, he becomes a very valuable piece and an enormous upgrade. Likely a bigger upgrade over anyone they will take in this draft because, and I cannot emphasize this enough, most rookies are bad. Zach Tom is going to be expected to start for this team. I think it is intuitive to expect he will be better, and he was good. One of the best pass blocking offensive linemen, tackles at least, in the league last year, and the best pass blocking rookie. The best as a day 3 pick. He has the athletic profile. This is not smoke and mirrors. He has the bona fides. Go back and watch the tape from Wake Forest. Go back and watch the tape of how he handled pass rushers last year. There's a reason he got the job over Yosh Nijman eventually. He's probably going to be called up upon this team to start. And that means he could be better, certainly than Royce Newman was for the first month of the season. He can be better than Yosh Nijman was because he ultimately replaced Yosh Nijman. And so that can be a meaningful upgrade for this team. Quay Walker in year 2, he had some games in the second half of the season where he was the Packers' best defensive player. All over the field, we saw the speed, we saw the instincts going downhill. If he can get the temperament a little bit dialed back, if he can focus that energy. Because I love a linebacker who is a crazy person on the field. Mike Singletary was an absolute psycho. Ray Nitschke was we know Ray Lewis. These guys on the field, they were like outside their minds. That's great. You almost need that at the position. If he can channel it a little bit better, he has all of the physical tools to be a very good, very useful, very versatile linebacker for the Green Bay Packers. Yeah, you could get a pass catcher in the first round, and they could be really good. Receivers are more ready than ever to come in and contribute. Tight ends are not. You get a pass rusher. Okay, great. Big 12 pass rusher. You get an Anadike Uzoma, or you get Keon White from Georgia Tech, who's coming in from the ACC, not necessarily facing the same sort of quality of talent. It will be an adjustment period. It will take time. If they take one of these raw upside pass rushers, it's going to take adjusting. They are not going to give you right away what a Devontae Wyatt in year 2 could. And this is not to temper expectations. I want you to be excited about the draft. I'm really excited about the draft. This is not at all to say, like, don't expect these guys to be good. Understand what history tells us about rookies. And it's great to be excited because rookies are not just what they are in year 1. Rookies are so much more than that. Rashawn Gary has proven that. Aaron Rodgers has proven that. And we'll see if Jordan Love is able to prove that. We're going to get to Kevin in just a second. Before we do, today's episode brought to you by our friends at Built Bar. Built is my go-to every single day, almost. I had one yesterday. I'll have one today. I had one the day before that. Right now, I've got the coconut puff flavor. I've got the mint chocolate flavor. They taste like a certain other famous chocolate mint cookie that you might be familiar with. And they have all of the macros that you're looking for. The grams of protein, 17. That's big time. And yet we're talking about something that has 4 grams of sugar and just 130 calories. So you can go to built.com and buy yourself some today. I just did. I need to restock. I've got the new flavor. They had the peanut butter launch coming. Just snagged those. Cookies and cream puffs. Yes, I grabbed those. You can go to your local Walmart, your local Sam's Club now, and you can get yourself a box. You don't have to wait for the shipping at built.com, which, by the way, usually gets here in a blink. But if you want today, or you're out running errands, Walmart, Sam's Club, get some, and you can thank me later. Join Kyle Krabs, Joe Marino, and Locked On NFL experts on Locked On NFL Scouting YouTube page for live NFL draft coverage presented by Ultimate Football GM. Kyle and Joe will be live during all rounds 1, 2, and 3. And then on Saturday, they'll get you caught up after each round. Join the draft dudes for the first round tomorrow night live on YouTube and on Locked On NFL Scouting at 7:30 East. Joining me now from Unexpected Points, formerly of Pro Football Focus, Kevin Cole. And Kevin, you did a really interesting study on tight ends recently on traits that translate, on how we can think about this class in particular. I'm going to dig into all of that cool stuff. Let's start with your starting point for this piece. What were you trying to find, and how did you go about trying to find it?
Sure. I mean, I compare it somewhat to some research I've done on quarterbacks, where for wide receivers, for running backs, and some of this goes all the way back to doing a lot of work in the fantasy football space, trying to project those guys coming out,
Sure.
skill position guys coming out. You have enough prospects and enough guys on the field. They rotate at running back. You can have up to 3 wide receivers on the field at a time to build a decent sample to try to go through and like model out in an algorithmic sort of way who's going to be good, who isn't going to be good, and do that sort of things. It's really difficult to do that for quarterback and for tight end. I mean, for quarterback, it's mostly you look at draft position and then you maybe sprinkle some other things in there, and then Josh Allen comes in and just blows everything up so that you realize that you have no idea what you're doing. For tight end, I think it's similar. It's probably even more difficult in the fact that draft position has not been as strong of a signal. We've seen lots of first round guys not do as well. And then we've seen some of the elite tight ends that we have. I mean, there are even fewer of them than there are for quarterback, really. Maybe we're talking about Kelsey, Kittle, Mark Andrews could pop up there. Waller plays well sometimes, but there just isn't that much to really go off of. So, but with all that in mind, I said, okay, let's not try to like model it out because it's not going to work so well. Let's try and figure out just bucketing based upon percentiles, different types of stats, look at how tight ends win in the NFL and to see what may translate through, because generally tight ends just are not being used the same way in college as they are in the NFL.
Right.
Even if you have a George Kittle on your roster, you're only going to have him for a year or two, possibly. College coaches are not going to like turn over their whole system knowing that there's a 99% chance the next tight end who comes in is not going to be able to do what George Kittle can do. So I try to figure out based upon limited on what they could do. And,
except that Iowa somehow, they just keep churning out these guys who are just like really, really good.
Yeah,
in what is otherwise a terrible offense.
They break the mold as far as that's concerned. But, George Kittle like barely did anything as far as his college production. There's a reason he was a 5th round pick, even though he completely destroyed the combine and everything like that. So I try to figure out what are tight ends doing in the NFL and what sort of traits can we maybe figure out from that. One of them is after the catch. So guys like Kelsey and Kittle, not Mark Andrews as much. He's actually used a little bit more down the field than you would expect for tight ends. But most of the time, even Rob Gronkowski, who was a yards per reception type of guy, are generating a much higher percentage of their yardage after the catch than most wide receivers. Kind of like slot receivers a little bit in that sort of way. So they tend to have those sorts of traits of being able to generate yards after the catch. And then also PFF tracks avoided tackles, which I think is maybe even a little bit stickier or more translatable in some ways than just looking at yards per after the catch, because sometimes the equivalent play could be 5 yards after the catch if there happen to be no defenders there, or if you're close to the end zone, versus 50 yards after the catch. Whereas, for the avoided tackles, you're getting that. So I looked at that and I noticed, hey, the guys who are generally good in the NFL were outperforming on those metrics. There's a range, but they're normally outperforming on both of those metrics. And then I also just looked at purely at speed. And it's something where agility is something that also comes up, but speed is something where you get a larger database of testing numbers. You can go back a bit further. I think the accuracy is probably a bit higher than it is when they're timing the 3-cone drill and other things. So it's just simply looking at these sorts of things and say, hey, if you have guys who hit the thresholds in avoiding tackles, hit the thresholds in speed, especially short area speed, in the 10-yard split there, because we're mostly playing the game within 10 yards in the NFL. Hey, those guys end up being pretty good in the NFL, regardless of where they were drafted. So why not at least look at those types of metrics and keep those in mind when you're deciding who to draft at tight end? Because we're so bad, at least we have been, at rank ordering them in the NFL draft.
I want to ask you about that piece of it, because I went back and looked. I had for a long time been, don't take a tight end in the first round. All the data says, and PFF has done some really good studies, and I don't know if you were there when they did some of those draft history studies and were a part of those, but we're really bad at figuring out who is good and who is bad. We, meaning the NFL, right? And so I've just sort of been like, it's not worth it in the first round. Then I went back and looked, and since 2000, there's only been 25 first-round tight ends. That's a really, really small sample. So what do you make of any of these like sample bias and issues that could crop up there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is an issue. There's no doubt that it's an issue that we just haven't had a lot. And there have been some big successes in the first round. I mean, I think Tony Gonzalez was a first-round pick.
Yep.
Vernon Davis was a first-round pick. There have been guys who have done very well.
Jeremy Shockey is another one.
Yeah. So there have been guys who have done well coming out of there. It's just really hard. It aligns with, and this maybe goes back to what I was hinting at earlier, like what we're able to digest from college evaluation. This is not just stats. I think this is also tape evaluation. Is just really hard to translate that to the NFL, the tight end position, the hardest of any skill position, because they just aren't doing what you'd expect them to do in the NFL a lot of the time. They are just a cog in a system most of the time there. And when you think quarterbacks, aren't doing what they're necessarily going to do in the NFL, and the NFL has kind of adjusted a bit for that, it's even more so here. And it's really one of those things where you just have to say, just have to have less confidence in that kind of rank ordering. And I think that's the important part. It isn't necessarily saying, let me look at these other types of metrics, and now I'm going to be overconfident in those metrics. And I'm going to say, Sam Laporta, I'm skipping ahead a little here, has to be tight end 1 because he looks so good in these sorts of metrics. It's more like,
don't threaten me with a good time, Kevin.
Yeah, they're all pretty good. So if anything, maybe for me, it would be more like a staring contest with some other teams, and just say, I'm not going to be the one to jump at someone, let's say at the 15th pick for a tight end.
Let's just say, yeah.
When possibly, another round later, I could get someone who's only marginally worse as far as their ability to hit at that point. Whereas at other positions, and this is when it becomes like all an opportunity cost sort of thing, moving from the first to second round, when we talk about an edge player, when we talk about a tackle, players that you can evaluate much better. I mean, these are isolated type of interactions that are having on the field that you can isolate much better. It just makes sense that we would be better at rank ordering those types of players.
So this is, and to your point about the adjustment of scheme with a quarterback, you will build your whole offense around the strengths of your quarterback. It makes sense to say, hey, Robert Griffin, those things you were doing at Baylor, let's try them in the NFL. You're not going to do that with a tight end, because you just can't really, but unless they're that Kyle Pitts level, elite kind of guy, you're just not going to say, we're going to, schedule our whole offense around you. But so that leads us to a really interesting place. The really, really good tight ends are really, really valuable. You've done some great data work on the value of Rob Gronkowski and what he brought, and some of the value that is not showing up in the stat sheet because he was such a dominant blocker as well. It seems like having a really, really good tight end is really, really valuable in a way that, say, having a really good running back or a really good guard is just not in the same way. And so you can make the case, okay, it makes sense to try and use premium draft assets to get that guy. But then we run into this point that you've made that, well, it's really hard to project them. And traditionally, we're really bad at it. So how do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah, I mean, I think for tight end, it's not unique, but it's very different than other positions because it's normally a slower developing position. Now, I think it could be a bit faster, maybe if teams said, we're just going to, put you out in the slot a bit more and not have to be so responsible for, pass blocking, a defensive end, and things like that. That's going to take a little bit more time to get used to, bulk up maybe a little bit more when it comes to run blocking, things like that. So it's a slower developing position. So the value on the rookie contract, it's going to be up and down for some different players. I think where the value really comes in tight end is if you do hit on one of these elite players. And again, it's a pretty small group.
You're probably not going to do that. It's just the reality.
So it's a big if here. If you do hit on them, I think the value you're getting, the surplus value you're getting on their second contract is probably unmatched in the NFL because of the franchise tag more than anything else. I mean, the franchise tag is calculated based upon the top 5 players at the position. There just are never top five elite tight ends in the NFL. If they are, their contracts are staggered when they were signed. So they're just perpetually behind the curve when it comes to how much money that they're making. If you look at the amount of money, Gronkowski was making, Kelsey has made over their careers, Kittle makes with this contract, you have that as leverage when you're a team for a position that gets injured a lot too and doesn't necessarily stand up the test of time when it comes to that. You can come to a player after his 3rd season and say, hey, we're going to give you this better than franchise tag sort of contract. You're going to lock it in. If you're a 5th round pick like Kittle, you've made nothing your entire career to that point, and you're able to get them at really, really great values there. So I think that's where the value really is. Now, as far as how you bring all this together, I would say maybe volume over premium picks might be a way of doing it. I don't really have the data. I'm not inside NFL buildings to really tell how quickly they're able to identify that they've hit on picks. But I know for other positions, you'd be surprised that, all this evaluation, all this tape watching, everything else that goes on, there does seem to be something, at least I've heard for wide receivers, where almost a couple of weeks into rookie camp, they're like, I can't, he's done. Like, I can't really deal with this guy. So maybe if there's a similar phenomenon with tight ends, just saying, you know what, if we throw a 2nd round pick at a tight end and a 3rd round pick at a tight end, or a couple 3rd round picks at a tight end, just be willing to write off in some of those circumstances, knowing that if you do hit on one, you're going to have a value at that very low rookie contract, and you could probably extend them for an extremely valuable contract.
Yeah. All right, we're going to get back to Kevin in just a second, but before we do, I want to remind you about our Locked On NFL Mock Draft Special. It is here and bigger than ever. Follow along all 32 teams' first picks in a 6-episode ultimate mock draft experience. Only Locked On can deliver. All episodes available now on Locked On NFL Draft on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. I had a blast doing this as Brian Gutekunst made a big trade. Still got the player that I think the Packers are trying to target here. I put that episode, or at least that clip, in an episode earlier. And so if you missed that, go check out the full mock. It was an absolute blast to do. Go check that out. Yeah, to your point, the franchise tag for 2023 for tight ends was 11.3 million. For receivers, it was almost 19.7. So we're talking about half the cost on the franchise tag, half the cost on a second contract. And to your point on just basically throwing money at the problem, the Patriots did this in the 2020 draft. They drafted 2 tight ends. Neither of them worked. And a year or two later, they had to spend a lot of money on Jonnu Smith. And they didn't have to, right? And Hunter Henry, because they felt like this position, they needed help there. And so it's really tough. Okay, we've gotten the preamble out of the way, which I think was really valuable. And I don't want to, diminish it. But the reason people are here is they want to know who's going to be good in this draft class. The data that you put together for this class is really interesting. What did you find about this class?
Well, I mean, I found, as most people are saying, that this is a very strong class. Not only when it comes to the tape watching stuff, the estimated draft positions that we're seeing for a lot of these guys, but again, on these metrics that I'm looking at, whether they're good at avoiding tackles, whether they're good after the catch, whether they're athletic. And I think we heard a ton of buzz around the combine about just how athletic this tight end class was. I mean, it's all true. But what I would say is, in a weird way, again, it comes back to this like not blinking first in the staring contest sort of way. And I think some people have thought about this with wide receiver in the past. It's like, well, if we know we can get someone pretty good later, then maybe it actually loses some of their value earlier. It's one of these, like, maybe it sounds galaxy brain-ish, but if there's a run, then there's a run. No, it doesn't to me. If there's a run, there's a run. So then you have to react to that. But even so, I think there are a number of tight ends in this class. I mean, probably half a dozen at least, who probably could end up being, an elite tight end or an adjacent to elite tight end, which still has a lot of value in the NFL.
So I think you mentioned one of the guys who stands out here in a way that does not match his pre-draft buzz. That's Sam Laporta. I'm going to get to the discount guys in a second. What did your model find about the two top guys, Michael Mayer and Dalton Kincaid?
Yeah, so I think Mayer is someone, and again, I ended up adjusting some stuff here. I had some 10-yard split information where his 40 is like a little bit above the 50th percentile, coming around the 60th percentile, which is okay. And his 10-yard split. Now, initially when I sent this out and everyone started crapping on Mayer because of that, which is not my intention, but it ended up happening.
No, you hate Michael Mayer. We all know it, Kevin.
Yeah. So yeah, my fault, my bad here. Actually, NFL's bad. You think Game Pass and trying to find videos is bad on there. Now they're hitting us again.
It is very bad.
Now they're hitting us with 10-yard split, which I guess they never updated the unofficial times, is what I'm hearing on their website. So it said 166 on the website. It's actually 161, which puts them right around that 60th percentile. So I think it's that combined with his other measurables. He's not the biggest guy. He doesn't have the longest arms, obviously, for catch radius. His broad jump was under 10 feet. His vertical jump was 32.5 inches, which are, like meh sort of numbers. Yep. His agility numbers were fine, although that's, it wasn't, he really did not.
Better at his pro day. He ran a 3-cone in under 7 seconds at his pro day, which is pretty good at 250, but pro day numbers.
Yeah, so it's much better at the pro day than it was at the combine, where I think it was 7.26. So, he looks good enough. So I don't think I want to take him out of the picture, but I guess it's just by these metrics, he's not necessarily separated himself. And even when it comes to avoided tackles, he was about in the 75th percentile, which is plenty good enough here. Again, it's just really like, are we so certain that he's the top tight end? And if we're not certain, if we think that he could be the third or fourth, then the middle of the first round just seems rich to me.
So then there's this second tier of guys, and the second tier of guys performs particularly well. Sam Laporta, Darnell Washington. I saw a tweet from Scott Barrett the other day that had, on a per reception basis, Darnell Washington led this class in explosive plays and missed tackles, like this slew of metrics. And it was just sort of like, yeah, I mean, he's a freak athlete. What do you see there that I think underscores the point that you're making of like, hey, let's wait, because it makes more sense to grab some of these guys on day 2.
Yeah. I just don't see any reason why you necessarily would prefer Mayer to either one of those guys. I mean, I guess I would lean a little bit more towards Laporta, even above Washington, because of the fact that he scored a little bit better in these metrics. And I guess I don't care as much about size. I think maybe from an NFL perspective, we're talking about run blocking. We're talking about those things. Either I just don't get it, or it's like, let's face it, the guys we think are the best tight ends are not necessarily the run blocking guys. Yeah, we could say Kittle's a great run blocker, but in some ways, if it's taking him out of the passing game, or if you're in a run dominant offense, or if it's leading to injuries, which I think it also is probably more taxing on the body to push against another NFL player. I mean, let's face it, normally an offensive lineman has like a 30 to 50 pound advantage on who he's run blocking against. It could be the flip side for some of these, not the flip side, but it could be, lower, obviously. They're lower, some of the tight ends in there.
And I think there's a reason Travis Kelce in the NFL has been much more durable than Rob Gronkowski. He does not spend nearly as much time banging bodies inside.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like even for Gronk, like if of course he had back problems going all the way back to college, but if he could, his value as a receiver was so high. And I know there's always this thing of, you want to have, dual value in both games and to not tip off defenses and things like that. I think that's probably a little bit overhyped. And I guess even for someone like Laporta, I think size may be his concern, but for me, it's not really a concern. It's more like I feel good knowing that he's probably not going to be doing too much blocking in some ways.
I think that makes sense. What is interesting to me about the Packers is they have always been a team that has said, we're fine waiting till day 2. Like infamously or famously, depending on your perspective, we will wait till day 2 on receivers. We do not care about receivers in the first round. And now it seems like they have a lot of interest in taking a tight end in the second or in the first round. And yet that would go counter to all of the things that they have, I think, again, rightfully thought about this. So if you're going to advise the Packers on all of this, how would you go about saying this is what makes sense. Like, think about this. You have, like you said, some of that fantasy football background too. We think about this in fantasy drafts. All right, I want to find my tight end here. I think this is where the value is. If you're advising the Packers, what is your game plan for them?
I mean, I'd say, pass in the first round. Sorry, guys. So don't be the first one
You have to
turning the
apologize.
card. Don't be the first one to turn the card there. I also saw it was very interesting. Like Peter King had a mock today where I think he had Mayer going to
The Giants.
Yeah, going to the Packers. And one of the things was like to help Jordan Love. I mean, tight ends aren't really that great in year one. I mean, it's possible to be great in year one, but I don't think it's even necessarily a thing. I mean, maybe I'd go back in time and like go aside because it is looking pretty bleak as far as the depth chart is concerned at tight end. So that could have been an option. I'm not sure if there's anyone out there at this point in time, since some free agents are a little bit cheaper there. But I would say it's maybe on day two, so maybe even the second round, look for someone. If they all get off the board before the second round, then just be willing to use multiple picks on the position from that point forward. And like I said, there are a lot of guys here. I mean, as far as hitting the 50%, and these are fairly arbitrary thresholds here. The 50% threshold for avoided tackles and speed in this class, we have 7 different tight ends who hit that there. And we also have guys who had production. And that doesn't even include Dalton Kincaid, who didn't test. And I assume that he would test well enough.
Yeah.
Although he's someone.
Can you just give us those 7 names just so people have them?
Sure. So Luke Musgrave is on here. Zach Kuntz is on here. Will Mallory, Tyler Kraft, Darnell Washington, Sam Laporta, Michael Mayer, all hit there. Did I hit them all, or did I miss one?
I think that was 7.
Yeah, so they're all on here. Oh, also Strange from Penn State. He's on here too. And a lot of these guys, if you look at where they're estimated to go in the draft, we're talking about day 3 type of picks. Someone will probably move up, and there'll probably be some guys taken. Tight end's a pretty unpredictable position when it comes to who ends up jumping up into the 3rd round. So that'll probably end up happening. But I think you're going to be able to find some of these guys.
Kevin, this has been awesome. Thank you so much. Where can people find this? Because you wrote a whole post on this. Where can they find the work that you're doing?
Sure. It's at unexpectedpoints.substack.com. I come out with a few articles a week, few research articles. I try to mix in some free ones there for I respect the freeloaders who are on there for their subscriptions there. I also do an interview once a week, and normally like a wrap-up Q&A type of pod at the end of the week, where I talk about whatever's happening in the football world, what things are making me annoyed that I'm hearing from people, and just answer questions from random YouTube listeners who are tuning in. So all of that's available on the Substack. Continue seeing things through the summer, have a little bit of a fantasy football tilt towards it, but also trying to really stick to the quote unquote analytics and my takes in that regard.
Kevin, this was great. Thanks so much, man.
All right. Thank you.
All right. And thanks to Kevin for joining the show. Always great to talk to him. I think there's some really interesting stuff in there. I'm fascinated to see how the Packers handle the tight end position. I still think there's a chance that they're trading down and they're going to get a tight end in the 1st round. Is it what I would do? It's probably not. Would I understand it? Yes. And Brian Gutekunst said yesterday that need bleeds into how you stack the board. And so if you need a tight end, you might stack a tight end a little bit higher, because the board is really about preference. Where I would take this guy relative to this guy. I would rather draft this guy than this guy. And even if the grade is a little bit higher or lower, I think the tiered draft approach is the way to go. So, okay, we've got 1st round grades on all these guys. Well, bang, let me get this tight end. I think that is, frankly, a smart way to handle the draft, because it is not just about best player available and grades. It is about the player that can most impact your team over the life of their rookie contract. And sometimes that might be a tight end. All right, we're going to be back tomorrow to get you set for the 2023 NFL draft. Remember, we are going live Thursday night after the draft. After the draft, not after the Packers pick. After the draft, because I think there's a chance the Packers pick twice. I think there's a decent chance that happens. There is a real possibility. They have been looking into it. So after the 1st round, then we will do it on Friday night after rounds 2 and 3, and then back with you, your regularly scheduled programming to recap everything from around the draft. On Monday, we'll jump into our rookie orientation series, getting to know all of these players, or as many of them as we can get to. And we're going to have a lot of fun in the coming weeks. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out with us live, like Thursday night, like Friday night, like we did when Aaron Rodgers was traded, you can do that on our Locked On Packers YouTube page so you can stay Locked On Packers.